All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is 95 degrees outside, but it is very cool in here. All right. All right, so welcome to the panel. Today, we are going to talk about trust. I think trust might be the most valuable and fragile currency right now that any brand has or wants. Because the truth is, audiences today, they're incredibly sharp. They get it. They know when a brand is showing up authentically, and they also know when a brand is just showing up for the moment. So today, that's what we're going to unpack, what it really looks like and how brands can actually move from being visible to being trusted, which is more important. And I couldn't ask for a better group of people to have this discussion with today. I am going to actually have you all introduce yourselves. Please tell us your name, your role, and what company you represent.
Start. Hi, I'm Haelim. I am from Etsy. I've been there for 9 years. I'm so excited to be here in Austin. This is my first time here. I lead the brand creative studio there. It's a team of multidisciplinary creatives, designers, makers, and operational experts that bring Etsy's brand to life. And I'm really excited to talk about authenticity. It's a really big personal value of mine, and it shows up in a lot of the work that I do. And a lot of the work that we do at Etsy is about getting people to feel seen. So it's something that, it's a value that I lead with as well for my team.
I'm Heather Larimer. I'm the Executive Creative Director of Orchard Creative, which is a totally independent ad agency, very rare, and is based in Brooklyn, New York. And for 3.5 years, I've been helping shepherd the Etsy brand with Haelim. And it's been a really deep, trust-based partnership. I've learned so much from Haelim. And so we're going to talk a lot about our collaboration today.
Hi, I'm Paul Woolmington, Chief Bottle Washer for Canvas. We're independent as well, about 650 people, 6 offices in the States. And I love this topic. I think trust is, in a world of depth and breadth of media and living kind of naked in front of the consumer, so to speak, your values and your purpose and how you show up in what you do rather than what you say necessarily, or what you do and then say what you do. It might be the right order. So over to you.
Right, I should introduce myself. I am Lolita Morrow. I'm Vice President of Brand Partnerships for Genius. For those who know, Genius is the world's foremost music knowledge platform. We are the home for lyrics. And actually, that's a perfect segue, and I'm going to look at you, Paul. While we were mulling over this topic, we thought it would be fun to have an icebreaker. So we are going to share a song that we grew up listening to, only to realize we completely misunderstood the lyrics. Now, a song that you grew up to singing, only to realize you completely misunderstood the lyrics. So I'm going to pass it to you first, Paul.
Well, I'm showing my age here, but there was a great Jimi Hendrix song, and I always misunderstood. I thought, this is actually, kind of really progressive, but excuse me while I kiss the sky, I thought was, excuse me while I kiss this guy. Or the other one I'll just throw in for good luck is Tiny Dancer, and I always thought he was actually giving a call out for Tony Danza.
I wish. That would be a better story. Growing up, I was sort of into this song called Whoomp. There it is. Those are parentheses that I'm doing with my hands. But I thought it was Whoomp Daddies, like the group was declaring themselves hardcore Whoomp Daddies. And my brother heard me singing it, and he said, you're an idiot. It's Whoomp, there it is.
I don't have one because I'm one of those people that I get all the lyrics wrong. I'm always singing the wrong lyrics. So for me, it's like every song. I'm like, what is this about? And then I learn later what it's actually about.
Well, now for me, the song was actually The Police. You know, I remember being a teenager and I was like, every breath you take, I'll be watching you. And I thought that was such a beautiful love song, but it's creepy because it's kind of stalkery and obsessive when you listen to it. So I'm walking around as a teenager singing the song only to realize that it could literally be on MSNBC one day in one of those shows. So yeah, that's the fun thing about lyrics. Okay, let's get into this. This is why I brought cards today, because I know I can get off topic easy. So when we're talking about trust, showing up authentically in culture is very important. And I'll start with you, Haelim. You know, Etsy's brand is deeply connected to the human touch point, individuality. How do you scale authenticity without losing that intimacy that people trust you for?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. For us, the most authentic voices are going to come from our sellers. They are the heart of our brand. And really, as marketers and creatives, it's our job to figure out, how do we amplify their voices in meaningful ways? How do we tell their stories when we, as a brand, are a part of that? So Heather and I have done a lot of work with one of our campaigns, which was around our brand mission of keeping commerce human. We were going back and forth of like, what is Etsy's role in this when we have to, you know, when we're talking about the sellers and bringing them front and center, like what is the balance between the brand and our sellers? And another thing I think about when it comes to authenticity is the connection you have with the sellers as a buyer. When you're working with them, you're co-creating with them. You know, I'm Korean American, grew up in Ohio. You are not going to see my name on a keychain or a license plate at a gift shop. Lolita, I'm sure you can relate. You're not going to see your name, right? Paul, maybe. Heather, yes. But at Etsy, you can connect with the seller that can make your name onto a necklace, maybe even in Korean, maybe even a Korean seller. That is the most authentic connection you're going to get. And so our job is really to spotlight those stories or bring those sellers to you as a buyer, right? That's what authenticity is, when you can have those meaningful connections. And it's really bringing those stories to life.
Heather, I know you might probably have some.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know your thoughts. We talk about this all the time.
I think what's so interesting about Etsy as a brand, it's got 7 million sellers. It's maybe the most human platform on earth. And as a creative director on the Etsy business, trying to figure out, that's such an intimate relationship. What's most meaningful to Etsy users is the one-to-one relationship like Haelim is talking about. But to make that felt on a grand scale is always hard, because, you know, when we just see people making things, we've seen that a million times. It's not new news. It doesn't resonate. And so trying to make that a question of humanity and like how we want to live, so that we really understand the what's at stake when we are choosing to shop on, we won't say the name, but versus Etsy, you know, it really matters, and it matters for some existential reasons and some very personal reasons. And so like learning how to tell a story from a very one-to-one intimate scale to a global scale I've learned so much.
You know, when I think of Etsy, one of my favorite commercials is actually Little Drummer Boy was one. I actually have, I won't give it away, but you guys can look that up. It's an amazing spot. I have a kid, an 18-year-old, who is very similar to the little boy in the spot. And when it touches you like that, and that's where I think trust and brand extension, when it really hits home, where when it's gone, you're thinking about it, and then you go onto the site, and then you're purchasing something, but it's sort of tugged at your heartstrings. And, you know, just wanted to give a shout out for that, because that was one of like my favorite spots.
Thank you.
On the platform.
We worked really, really hard on it.
Yeah, it's really good, really good. Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on it. Actually, when we were chatting, I really meant this when I said that I can't think of a brand that has more authenticity, that is craft-based, artistic-based, and, you know, as Etsy is. And you know, that wonderful, delicate balance you must have. I mean, you've obviously got that ingrained in your DNA, and a lot of other people have to manufacture it into their DNA. But it really is great testament to the work you're doing. I love the Etsy platform. I always use it. I've done crazy customized things you were describing. And the experience is always wonderful. And the people, you kind of really feel like you're doing good. I mentored a couple of people. We were talking a little on the sideline, and check it out. There's a series of books been written by After and Bobby Jones, and it's good is the new cool. So essentially, it's the principles of purpose, market like you give a damn. I actually host an event called Good Con. They're doing one in London. They do it in New York and LA, and we must get you guys involved. But it really, I feel, but I want to give you one very quick case. We were pitching a bank, and I think banks and financial institutions generally aren't very trusted in this day and age. Especially bankers, you know, they kind of every 5 years take the entire economy down with some, you know, financial mechanism. But we were pitching the business, and I was running a company called Naked Communications, and essentially we were pitching against the big holdcos, and they had one of the big holdco advertising agencies had created a tagline, and they were running advertising, the bank that likes to put you first. And it was this kind of generic, it didn't really say anything. So what we did was, in the pitch, I got 50 of my team to call the 1-800 number and ask and record the financial institution's call center, how do you put me first? And we recorded them. And essentially, at the beginning of the pitch, we played it back to them. And amongst other things, people were trying to explain the call. Well, no, you don't actually get, you get grouped in groups of 10, and then we answer. So they were trying to explain so these are people that were supposed to understand what the brand positioning is. And then the final one, which was the pièce de résistance, is this lovely lady said, that's what they say in the advertising. They stopped the pitch, excused us, cancelled, stopped the advertising, hired my company, and we said, and built products and services that put customers first. And it was like, and then actually then they did away with the tagline. But what I was saying is, it was a reference to do first and then speak about what you do. And I've got hundreds of these examples, and lots of people want to immediately go and talk about it rather than do it and then talk about what you do. Yeah,
wow.
Anyway.
No, that's an awesome example. And it's a great sort of segue into sort of earning attention and credibility. You know, so we've talked about culture and what it takes for brands to really show up authentically. But culture alone just doesn't do it. You have to be able to build trust, and you have to show up creativity and show that it matters that much to you as well. I'm gonna stay with you, Paul, for this one. I'm gonna move around a bit. We did talk about earlier about creativity as a business multiplier. And in an era of, I said I wasn't going to say the word, I'll say it one time, AI. So in the era of AI and automation and content overload, you know, what does trustworthy creativity look like? And you really sort of gave us an example.
So I'll give another example, and it's in the QSR category. A client of ours is McDonald's, and we were blessed. We pitched, and we're working with Wyden & Kennedy. And my firm is involved in multicultural strategy. So we don't do any media buying. But we're hardwired. I mean, if you don't win the multicultural, I mean, the minority is the majority. So it's like, it's not about buying ads on Hispanic media, although that's important as well, don't get me wrong. It's about, you know, at the core of your strategy, are you thinking of the diversity of America? And, you know, God bless. So so we were involved in the launch of Travis Scott's Famous Meals. And, you know, the authenticity and was that he loves McDonald's and he has his favorites. And therefore, the collaboration wasn't like rent a celebrity and put them in your ad. It was, you know, that fusion. But what I was going to really transition from is that was a successful strategy. We did Bad Bunny, we did so many others, but they were crossover artists. I mean, who isn't in this day and age? I mean, I celebrated like a crazy person when Bad Bunny was at the halftime show, you know, the Apple collaboration. And I think it was being a part of culture. So for Apple halftime show, amazing. You know, the halo effect. But I think for McDonald's, we were able to for an organization that has somewhere, you know, don't quote me, I think it's something like 18,000 restaurants across the US. How do you bring authenticity and how do you bring culture into it? And by the way, the CMO, who's now the global CMO, I remember her saying, I'm probably betting my job on this. Because obviously how brave it was for an organization at scale to pull off, you know, famous meals and things like that, but also to go with the flow. So, you know, under Tariq Hassan, who was then subsequently the US, I'll just end on this. I mean, you know, you just see people adopting new ways of eating or consuming McDonald's, and you go with the flow. So it's almost in reverse. Look at Korean Americans are doing this from their Korean culture. How do we embrace that and then actually, you know, beta it into products and services in the way that you serve?
Yeah.
So, you know, I haven't talked about AI. We might come back to it in an AI age. But I think, you know, in an AI age, we need to be even more human is probably the punchline. The punchline is, you know, we've had enough avatars in your website, but being human and understanding the human condition and those insights and then leveraging them in culture is something that is priceless. Yeah.
We talk about this all the time at Etsy too. AI is not to replace humans, it's to enhance, right? It's to help, at least on the seller side, what can we do to help support their businesses, you know, bring them more buyers, but it's not to replace humans.
Very true.
You know, going from like that attention to credibility, I'll actually point towards you, Heather, for this one. Maybe you can share something from Orchard. You know, music. You know, music and sound really have this unique ability to create emotional trust almost instantly. From your perspective, really, what makes creative feel culturally credible versus what could be seen as more commercially broad or pandering?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am not that interested in celebrity, just in general. I'm very skeptical of it, so I naturally just don't gravitate towards ideas that don't really have an idea other than a person whose talent and career you're just co-opting. Now, I want to make sure I say, I was earlier like, God, who has done this the best that I can think of recently? And it's McDonald's, because it's simple and true. Like, it's brilliant. But so music is a huge part of my job because a lot of our work, our films are scored or license a song. And I think it's so important to find the right person for the job and really work so diligently. An example, I'm glad you brought up Little Drummer Boy. So for those of you who don't know the work, it's the Etsy's holiday campaign last year. We wanted to tell a story of a gift making someone feel really seen. So we told the story of a very fidgety little boy, much like my 13-year-old, much like Haelim's child, much like your 18-year-old, a very fidgety little boy who a teacher sees and gifts personalized drumsticks. So making the music for that feel authentic was so important. And so, for example, Haelim didn't even know this until last night. We ended up having kids perform Little Drummer Boy. And a thing I did in the mix was I pushed the worst singer the loudest, because I was thinking of the Simpsons band in the opening credits of the Simpsons. And any elementary school kids performing a song, I always cry. So I sob very hard when I hear this. And I was like, it's too perfect. And so I asked the composer to find the most out of tune voice and push it, and it changed everything. And I think that's an example of it actually makes you cry and you might not consciously notice it, but hearing the friction in there, hearing the imperfections is what makes it feel so authentic and resonant. And I always want to push for that. Whatever kind of music we're doing is like the friction. To me, the friction point is often where the realness really comes through, and a viewer may never perceive it, but it's a really important thing. I'm always like a heat-seeking missile for the friction, because that's where it feels the most real.
I think that's really a big part of just sort of even building a community, even through Etsy and through a spot, and feeling connected. You know, a lot of audiences today, they don't want to be marketed to, right? They want to feel like they're a part of something. Case in point, I'll say at Genius, those of you who are familiar with Genius, it's the largest lyrical database in the world. So people go to Genius, what is Taylor Swift talking about in this lyric? And then people stay to annotate. They stay to say, well, this is what I think it means to me. Even artists have been known to jump on the platform and explain, this is what I mean by that song. So when you think of that and the most trusted brands, a lot of the brands today aren't just really broadcasting messages. They're creating spaces where people can feel like they're able to communicate and participate and contribute. Haelim, I'll tee this over to you again with Etsy, favorite brand of mine. One of Etsy's strengths is truly how deeply its community shapes the brand. As the business sort of continues to scale, curious to know how you ensure that that community voice sort of remains at the center and the focal point.
Yeah, we listen to a lot of feedback. I don't know if I recommend that in terms of like scrolling through the forums or posts, but also having our sellers come to our offices and headquarters. We have panels with them. We have an incredible seller engagement, research, and product team. We're always listening, asking for feedback, like what can be better to, you know, to support the growth of your business. And a lot of it has to do with building better tools, right? You know, sellers have a lot going on. How can we be their partners in scaling their business? So that's one part. We also actually listen to our buyers. We had our top buyers come to our office to share what they love about Etsy, you know, what they get excited about. And what we heard is, you know, they really care about what our brand has to offer, which is shopping from real people. They just want the experience to be more personalized. So we're always listening, and our CEO is constantly talking about how it's our most important job to get that feedback, you know, and we're always in service of our sellers. So it's listening to that feedback, like figuring out what can we do better. They're literally at every touch point when we're building the experience to launch, they're a part of that process.
Anyone have anything to add for that?
I can't say it better than Haelim.
Most people can. I mean, most people can. I didn't want to like move past it. I'm trying to stay on task. This is like, I'm telling myself, stay on topic, Lolita. But, you know, so we talked about trust. We talked about culture, creativity, and community, and how brands show up meaningfully in all three. But with that opportunity also comes responsibility. You know, when brands step into culture, they're not just participating in the moment, but they're also entering into these conversations that can be deeply personal, but also deeply impactful. You know, Paul, I think this one will probably be more for you. You know, agencies really sit at that intersection, right, of brand ambition and cultural insight. How do you guide clients to ensure that their ideas sort of resonate authentically with that cultural moment?
Yeah, I think it builds on the conversation we've been having here. I think it is a very close relationship that obviously you guys have, a really deep understanding of the brand you're working on, its brand promise, its, you know, and I think that we, in a digital age, unfortunately, you know, with the CFO as the boss of marketing, you know, everything has shifted toward you know, race to the bottom, you know, performance marketing, which is a race to the bottom. Everything should be in service of performance. So let's remember that we're commercial. It's commercial creativity, commercial. We're obviously in service of, I mean, unless you obviously are supporting a non-for-profit, but generally speaking. So I think it's obviously deeply understanding the purpose and obviously the business objectives. I mean, clearly no one is in this, particularly for, I'd say, 90% of brands. You have to do that. So it's a delicate balancing act. But I do think it's really trying to amplify what's genuinely authentic as part of the brand, but allowing this community, you know, the co-creation of it. Some are long customer journeys, some are very high interest categories. I mean, clearly high interest category like Etsy is, you know, it's magical because, you know, you've already got lots of assets, but we all know the lowest interest category is insurance. You only need insurance when you need insurance. Like, who wants to spend a lot of time worrying about what the insurance? I mean, yes, 15 minutes will save you, you know. But that's why at that end of the spectrum, you know, they rely on entertainment value. You know, if you think of, obviously, Allstate, State Farm, Geico, it's an arms race around, because it's a low interest category. So there isn't a lot of community there. I mean, how do you, probably the guys that do the best job is State Farm. You know, they somehow feel authentic in how they've supported women's sport. By the way, no one knows. I mean, they've been a supporter of women's sport, WNBA, not because we've discovered it in the last 18 months to 2 years. They're like 20-year involved in that sport. So they speak with authority and authenticity. So when they actually bring someone, so I'm using a low interest category where I feel like I get a sense of State Farm being differentiated from Geico. I like their values more and the way that they communicate, where they talk. And then at the other end of the spectrum, obviously high interest categories. So we could talk a lot. But I think in this age, you know, with influencers, creators, you're hardwired with creators. So maybe you don't need third party, but that's obviously exploded. You know, we now have 2 new seats at the marketing table, the creator and the influencer table. So how do you actually build that kind of, you know, micro influencers in many instances, as opposed to, you know, for every one Mr. Beast, there's, you know, 1,000 micro influencers. So I'm betting on the micro influencer actually really building community slowly, consistently, and over the long term. And that's the last thing, is the long term. Thinking of your brand promise over the long term. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So
I'd like to add to that. I think that so much of it, where you find that convergence between cultural relevance and brand authenticity, is in a really vigorous dialogue with your clients. Really, like, a thing that's very important to Orchard is that we listen harder than anyone. And Haelim and I have had a lot of really hard conversations. I'll never forget the day Haelim called me about a year ago and said, "Do you actually think this is good?" It's like the nightmare call from a client. And instead of getting defensive or being like, "This phone's not working," I was like, what are you trying to say? And we had a great conversation that completely transformed the work. And so we're in a constant push-pull where our agency is trying to help Etsy be heard and be ultra relevant. And Etsy is wonderfully tugging back and saying that doesn't feel like us. And that's how we get great work, is hard conversations and really vigorous push-pull.
Yeah, and I think because we hire agencies to push us, right? To bring us to the center of culture. But as a brand, we're constantly asking the question of, is this our voice? Like, are you pushing us too far? I don't want to be put in an outfit that I don't feel comfortable in, right? I want to look like the best version of myself. So that's something Heather and I talk about often. How far do we want to push the brand, yet, and it creates breakthrough creative, yet it still is authentically us.
You know, I think sometimes the most meaningful trust building really happens when brands listen and learn from the community, like you're saying. I'm just going to put this out there for anyone who wants to respond. You know, what does responding thoughtfully to feedback look like sometimes from a global brand? I can imagine it's tricky and very delicate, but if any of you can give us any insight into what responding thoughtfully, you know, to that feedback.
I think it would, I'm just going to throw it out there. I hope there's no one from Target here. and I'm going to give a shout out to Costco. You know, there's two phenomenal examples of being honest and embracing one, you know, an honest dialogue and, you know, right from the CEO through the organization. And I love the Target brand, and I'm so sad that they've lost their way recently. And I think the most recent examples are one where, you know, you can't please everyone at the same time. And Costco at the other end of the spectrum, you know, stood by principles. It's not a principle until it costs you money. And by the way, I'll give you one other example. And I worked with Nike for years, and Colin Kaepernick controversy, and when they ran that communication. By the way, the communication featured Colin, and he was obviously an athlete that for years was part of the, you know, was assigned athlete. But and very thoughtfully, when they ran the communication, they knew that they were going to upset people, because obviously it was, you know, it was kind of viscerally in your face. But I just love the way that they actually kind of thought through what could be the consequence of running this, because they knew that Nike needed to, because I think subsequent to that, they lost their way. Nike has lost its way. But let me stick to the story. So when the controversy broke and people were burning Nikes, guess what their response was? They said, there are thousands and thousands of people living homeless on the streets who cannot afford sneakers. So we accept that you're upset with Nike, but don't burn your Nikes, send your Nikes here. And I thought that was just kind of like a judo move of responsibility. And, you know, and of course, the Target, Costco, I think you all know what was happening behind the scenes there.
No, that was a great example.
It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just not being defensive. Feedback comes in many forms from many sources, and just being, it takes discipline and it takes a very deep breath, but to be curious about the feedback and what is actually right about the feedback, what you can learn from the feedback, and how you can respond in a way that's constructive, instead of avoid it or just shut it down. And I think your example is a really good one.
You know, I think we're getting close to time, but I'm going to push for another question. Take me down. You can't take me down. No. So a question for the panel. If you could give one piece of advice, because I know that's why a lot of us are here, if you could give one piece of advice to brand leaders who are trying to build trust through culture and creativity right now, what would that be?
I think it actually it starts with building trust with your team and investing in the relationships, whether it's your internal creative team or your agency partner. I mean, this relationship didn't happen overnight, right? It's a lot of conversations, a lot of voice memos back and forth, whether Heather likes it or not.
I do.
And having those really tough discussions, and because if you get to the heart of like what's working, what's not working, that's going to create the best work that's authentic to the brand. So I think it really starts there. And I think about that even within our team, giving them the space to be able to speak up when something is not working. And that only works when you have trust with the team.
I think it's getting people to really be themselves as much as possible, because that's how you find really unique insights that aren't just like focus grouped, that aren't just generic, is showing up as yourself and having everyone you work with feel safe to show up as themselves. And that's how the work gets so much more salient and pointed.
Just a plug. I think it starts internally, and I think creating strong, trusted cultures, whether it's the brand, the agency, and obviously that ecosystem of partners, is the beginning, the middle, and the end. I think great work. I think in an AI age where obviously some people are very fearful of their jobs, a lot of people are having to, literally a study says that 80% of what will, any profession, 80% of what will make you succeed in the future isn't what you learned in the past. So in that kind of fearful environment, how do you allow people to embrace the changes that come along with technology, embrace the changes in society? You just have to have really strong, nourishing cultures, and they're very fragile things. So, you know, you have to nurture them every day. You can't just, we're so proud. The proudest accolade Canvas has is for the last 3 years at Age, we've been in the top 10 best place to work. And that isn't an accolade that I can put a really fancy presentation to a jury. It's like 200 of my staff, or not staff, my colleagues, they're not staff, have to fill out a questionnaire. But I think it starts and ends there, and I think you do great work when you have trusted relationships.
I agree.
And it's, you can fail. You trust to fail.
Yeah. All right. I think the four of us should do a podcast. Let's get going.
Yeah.
So listen, thank you guys for joining today. So the brands, my closing thought is that, you know, the brands that win aren't the ones that shout the loudest. It's the brands that listen, collaborate, and show up with authenticity. I'd like to thank my amazing panelists for all of their feedback and wisdom, and thank you all for joining us today.
Let's hear it for them. Great panel.